Hi everyone, and welcome to my new series where I take a look at classic video games I haven't had a chance to play before. Today's video is dedicated to the iconic 1998 RPG Parasite Eve, developed by Squaresoft and released exclusively for the first Sony Playstation console. The game combines elements of horror, science fiction and RPG, creating something truly unique and memorable. Though the main question here is how this 25-year-old game plays today. Did it age well? How does it hold after all these years of gaming industry progress? Are there some game mechanics or design decisions that may be way too outdated and make the game less enjoyable? We're about to find out the answer to those questions in this video. Mandatory spoiler warning, as I will be covering the whole game, and also since it's the first Squaresoft M-rated game, there might be some disturbing scenes, but I will try to reduce them to a minimum. Without further ado, let's dive in. The game's story starts on Christmas Eve 1997. We play as Aya Brea, a rookie police officer who is attending an opera at Carnegie Hall in New York. But during the performance, everything goes terribly wrong, as when the lead actress Melissa starts her part, other actors and people in the audience suddenly start to ignite. Aya, for some reason, is not affected by this spontaneous combust, as it's called in the game, and she approaches Melissa on stage. The actress explains to Aya that she should be awakening soon, and her cells are trying to communicate, which makes zero sense for Aya and us at this point. Next follows the fight, where Aya unlocks her parasite energy. We'll talk about this feature of the game later. And Melissa reveals that she is actually called Eve and says that Aya should know her well. After a short flashback scene, Eve flees the stage and we follow her through the hole in the floor. When we descend, we see a little girl which Aya seems to recognize, but she quickly runs away and we proceed to the basement with dressing rooms. Now, the first thing I want to mention about this game is controls. I was hesitant to play Parasite Eve before, as I was expecting for some reason that it would feature tank controls, like the Resident Evil series and many other games of the PS1 era. If you don't know what tank control means, it's a control system whereby you control movement relative to the character position rather than the camera. If I had a chance to go back to the past and forbid one single game mechanic, erase it from existence, it would certainly be tank controls, as I just hate it with all my heart, and I'm grateful that Parasite Eve has proper controls based on camera position, otherwise for me this game wouldn't have been as enjoyable. You can control movements with either a D-pad or analog stick. I chose the latter as the D-pad has only 8 directions of movement, so for me it's more comfortable to play with an analog stick. The only problem is that when you use an analog stick, the D-pad becomes disabled and the menuing is arguably better with the D-pad, but I can certainly live with that. In the basement we start checking dressing rooms, but they are all locked. We will get a key for these doors shortly after. When we proceed to the next screen, we get quite a disturbing cutscene featuring red transformation into some monstrosity, followed by our first real fight. The game features a pausable real-time combat system with an ATB gauge like in Final Fantasy VII, However, in Parasite Eve you can freely move during the fight. That enables you to dodge attacks and projectiles and move closer to the enemy to be within the firing range. Once ATB gauge is filled, you can choose between several different actions. You can attack with your equipped weapon, use items, change your weapon and armor, or use Parasite's energy skills. If you choose to attack, the fight pauses and a dome showing the firing range appears, allowing you to choose your target. You can actually attack different targets during a single turn, and it will be helpful over the course of the game, as some weapons have unique attack modifiers like frost damage, burst AoE attack, or tranquilizer, to name a few. In one of the rooms we find a phone. This is the way to save the game, and it's quite essential as autosave wasn't a thing in PlayStation 1 era games. After some exploration and some battles, we read Melissa's diary and find a key to a rehearsal room. Now we can proceed further, but there is also an option to return to the theater entrance to receive some free healing and ammo. Anyway, when we open the door, we see Eve playing piano, and after another cutscene where she transforms, we get to battle her again. Upon our imminent victory, Eve states that Aya needs some time until her mitochondria is completely free, whatever it means. Aya gets another flashback with the girl we saw earlier, and once it's over, we find out that Eve has escaped, again, so we follow her to the sewer. After some battles and looting, we see a little girl once again and follow her to the next room. At the end of this room, we use a switch and find Eve once again. However, this time Eve decides that she doesn't even want to fight and escapes right away, leaving a mass of goo behind which transforms into an alligator. And here we have our first real boss fight. The game's tip tells us that there are two targets, hinting that we shouldn't probably attack the main body of the boss. After successfully dealing enough damage to the tail, we get into the second phase, which is much easier and provides more space to dodge enemy attacks. After the alligator has been dealt with, we get out of the building and Aya gets ambushed by some journalists. Suddenly a man appears and saves Aya with the power of his fists. This man turns out to be Aya's partner Daniel. Together they leave in the police car, and this is the end of day 1. Day 2 starts at the police precinct. After a couple of dialogues, Captain Baker sends you to the basement to get a weapon and gives you a mod permit. After you receive M16 from Torres, you can use mod permit that will add an additional effect slot. Now, in this game, every weapon and armor has a number of effect slots for certain modifiers. There are actually a lot of different effects available. Some weapons have them from the start, but if you want to add an effect to a weapon of your choice, you need to use the Tune Up feature. In the same room we find a tool item that allows us to add parameters or effects on weapons or armors. However, in the process, one of the items will be destroyed. Plus, this tool item can be used only once, though there are many can be found throughout the game. Later we will find a super tool that will allow us to move a parameter or an effect slot without destroying the item. Here you can also leave some items to Wayne. The inventory is very limited, and while it can be upgraded throughout the game, There's always not enough space to hold everything, and it's almost mandatory to keep a good amount of healing items, so if you don't need something, you can leave it with Wayne. You can also give him some junk that enemies drop occasionally to discard, and while it seems like a useless type of an item, if you gather and give Wayne 300 pieces of junk, you will get the ultimate weapon. That is, if you are ready to farm that much. We leave the room and proceed to loot some lockers for more items and return to the captain. It's time for a press conference, and while Captain asks Aya not to talk much, she starts explaining what happened to the press with low success. After discussing what to do, one of the policemen says that there is some researcher at the museum who was working on a theory about mitochondria, so that's where Aya and Daniel are set to go. We leave the precinct and get access to the world map. At this point, there's only two destinations: Carnegie Hall, where we have no business, and museum. So we choose the latter, and after the cutscene in the car, we arrive at the American Museum of Natural History, looking for Dr. Clamp to get more information about mitochondria. The guard is happy to let us through, and after signing the notebook, we proceed to Dr. Clamp's office. He is not the most hospitable guy and ignores detectives until Aya brings up the incident at the opera. When he turns, Aya gets a feeling that she somehow knows this doctor. After directly asking about mitochondria, Dr. Clamp finally starts talking. He blabs about how mitochondria is basically allowing us to exist, and that there was a research that all humans can be traced to a single African woman who was called Mitochondria Eve. After mentioning that the suspect also called herself Eve, Dr. Clamp ignores detectives again, and we get to leave the museum for now. While in the car, Daniel receives a phone call that there has been a break in the case. Turns out there was another concert planned with Melissa performing in Central Park, but even though it was cancelled, people were still gathering there, which would be another opportunity for Eve to commit mass murder. Turns out Daniel's ex-wife and son are supposed to be there, so we head to Central Park. Upon reaching the entrance, Daniel starts to ignite, so Aya has to proceed further alone. Here I want to mention how random encounters work in the game. It's quite similar to other RPGs of that era. In specific areas, players may encounter a so-called hotspot, which has a chance of encounter with enemies. It means that some of the areas of the game are safe, while in the hotspots you are likely to participate in fights. Anyway, after proceeding further through the central zoo gate and some exploration, we find ourselves in the theater where Eve turns the crowd into a slimy mass. We go backstage to confront Eve once again, however, she escapes as usual. Next, we follow her and find ourselves at a twisted system of paths with many loot boxes and random encounters. After some exploration, we eventually come to our next boss fight, 4 worms. At the beginning they are relatively small and fire a spear which explodes into a shower of spikes directed at us once they hit the ground. When you kill one of the worms, others grow and get more HP and additional damage to their spike attack. When only one worm is left, it gets a new ability, sweeping its body across the battle area, which is quite problematic to dodge. Once we defeat worms, we find Eve waiting for us in a carriage, inviting Aya to join her. Aya makes the conclusion that getting into a carriage with a monstrosity that just killed hundreds of people is the correct way to proceed, and we get into another fight with Eve. The battle itself is a little bit tricky as there's not much room to dodge incoming attacks, but there's nothing a couple healing items can't handle. After the fight ends, the carriage crashes and we see another flashback scene with the same hospital room, little girl and a doctor. Meanwhile, Daniel is still waiting at the park entrance when his son Ben appears, explaining that he left the concert when he began to feel ill and when his mother began to act strange. Now we get to see several cutscenes in the police precinct. Captain Baker says that the casualties were much worse this time and that they need to evacuate Manhattan. Daniel is set to leave the station in order to search for Aya, leaving his son with policewoman Kathy. She decided to let Ben play with one of the police dogs, Shiva. The streak of cutscenes continues with people trying to leave Manhattan, though one person is actually trying to get in. A Japanese scientist named Maeda, who sneaks into the city while one of the police officers combusts. Next, we see Aya waking up in the apartment in Soho with Daniel and Maeda at her side. Day 2 ends with Maeda explaining Eve's origins and sudden realization from Aya about her sister. Before we start with day 3, I want to mention the bonus points system. Upon increasing your level, you also get some bonus points which can be spent on improving ATB, inventory capacity, or attributes of a weapon or an armor. Frankly, I've spent the majority of my bonus points on inventory slots as it's just never enough. Going back to the story, when we get out of the apartment, it turns out that Maeda has been waiting for us on the street all night. Daniel pulls up in the car, and we have an option to explore an abandoned pharmacy and a weapons store before leaving the area. Here we can find many useful things, including some special items that allow us to upgrade parameters of our weapon or armor, increasing one of the characteristics. Now, Maeda wants to get to a research facility to test something out, so we return to the museum once again to use Dr. Clamp's room, hoping that he has evacuated the city and we won't have to encounter this wonderful guy again. Maeda says that he was able to extract some Eve substance from Aya's clothes and decides to check it through a microscope. Now Aya wants to know why she has the power to fight Eve, so Maeda gets a sample of her blood. Suddenly, Dr. Clamp appears and ruins the fun. Daniel sees his son's and ex-wife's names on the Clamp's computer screen and gets a little bit angry. We leave the museum and now it's time to return to the police station. Upon our arrival, we discover that the precinct has been attacked and Daniel rushes in to find his son. Maeda is trying to give us a lucky charm, and after finding some space in our inventory for this important item, we follow Daniel. Exploring the police station, we see that many of our colleagues have been killed. We find Wayne and almost dead Torres in the weapons department downstairs. Then going to the kennel, we find Kathy on the floor and she tells us that Shiva went berserk and Ben went after her. We proceed to the second floor of the building and after more fights and more exploration, we see a cutscene with Ben and Shiva. Captain Baker appears and takes Ben away from Shiva, explaining that she is sick. When we arrive at the room on the third floor, it's time for a boss fight, as we need to put Shiva down for good. After transformation, this dog has 3 heads and we need to deal with all of them. Shiva has several different attacks. A shockwave that can be dodged and cuts HP in half, a lunging bite and an energy blast. Her attacks don't deal much damage even when I fail to dodge them, and they can be healed through. She can also heal one of her heads for 100 HP, which is not a big deal really. Now is a good time to mention Parasite Energy. The game features a PE bar which is constantly recharging during the battle, though the more often you use Parasite Energy powers, the slower generation will be, so it makes sense to conserve its usage during the long fights. After getting to a specific level, you unlock one of the abilities. At this point of the game I have reached level 16, so I have already unlocked several powers: Heal 1 and 2, Scan, Slow, Detox, Barrier, and Energy Shot. The most useful are healing abilities, Barrier which blocks incoming damage, and Energy Shot that channels all your remaining energy into a single blast. I found Energy Shot quite convenient when ammo is low. The only downside is that after we use it, Aya becomes stunned for a couple of seconds and can't dodge incoming attacks. After defeating Shiva, the short cutscene follows and day 3 comes to an end. First thing we need to figure out on day 4 is why Eve has attacked the precinct, and for that we need Maeda's insight. We find him in the lab and he starts explaining the reasoning behind the attack. On the way to the hospital, Aya asks Maeda what happened to the ultimate being born in Japan, and he explains that it died as the mitochondria from the father didn't connect with the ones from Eve. Before we enter the hospital, Maeda gives us another lucky charm and we proceed inside. In the lobby, we check the door, which is locked, and find a hall with elevators. We see the little girl once again, but she's behind yet another locked door. We enter the elevator, but halfway through, Eve severs the elevator's cables, sending us to the basement. We would like to try another elevator, but Eve cuts off the power, so now in order to get out, we have to find a way to restore it. In order to do that, we need to find 3 fuses, but it's easier said than done. We find a door that can be unlocked with a blue card, so that's another item we will be looking for. Upon checking one of the storage rooms, we find the first fuse atop of the shelf. Behind the autopsy room, we find the second fuse atop the medicine box, and expecting a burnt body will get us a blue keycard, allowing us to proceed through the big doors we checked earlier. A girl Aya thinks to be her dead sister appears once again, but before following her, we check the room to our right and find the last fuse in the corner. Now we are ready to restore the power. We insert all 3 fuses into the box, repair wires, and turn on the power. Now we are ready to return to the ground floor. When we're back to the lobby, we see that north doors are now unlocked, hinting that this is the way we're supposed to go. Going through these doors, we find some more monsters and the doctor with her patient. After a short scene, she informs you that there's a nurse trapped in the next room. Once we get there and fight another pack of enemies, Aya realizes that this is the room from her flashbacks. In the corner we find a nurse who thanks us and provides us with the green card key, so now we can unlock large doors near the elevator. Going there, we meet a doctor who tells us that liquid nitrogen is used for the sperm bank, and in order to disable the cooling, we need to turn off a valve in the storage area. We also discover that the research lab is located on the 13th floor. We turn off the valve and go back to the elevator to get to the research lab. On floor 13 we fight some enemies and then find a note stating that our favorite Dr. Clamp was actually the one who's developed artificial sperm. We also find some medical records about Aya's sister. There's an elevator keyline nearby and we proceed to the roof of the building while watching a cutscene where the military sends fighter jets toward Central Park. Upon arriving at the roof, we meet a giant spider. This is another boss fight. The spider has 3 different attacks. It can spray 3 webs across the floor and immediately after that it either shoots a fireball or charges at us performing a melee attack. The only difficulty of this fight is the size of the area, and if we wouldn't have a long-range weapon, this fight would be much more problematic. After dealing a certain amount of damage, the battle switches into phase 2, which is exactly the same, except it's set on a different section of the rooftop. Once we defeat the giant spider, we get another cutscene with Eve, where she deals with fighter jets and escapes with artificial sperm. One of the jets seems to be planning to crash into the rooftop, so Aya decides to leave. We get into the scaffolding, and after a short battle, we reunite with Daniel and Maeda. In the car, Daniel tells Aya that there is new information about Clamp and Melissa so we return to the police station. We see a short dialogue, and this is the end of day 4. At the beginning of day 5, we see 2 new destinations on the world map, Warehouse and Chinatown. While the warehouse is a completely optional area, there is some really good loot, so I have decided to check it first before continuing the story. Now, the problem with this area is that the enemies are much stronger than before, and as I found out, it's not really a great decision to go there without any healing items. Sure, Parasite energy healing is saving us, but as I mentioned before, energy generation has diminishing returns, so it becomes less helpful in long fights. The warehouse is not that big, and after several random encounters, we arrive at the boss of this area, the giant crab. I've spent a good 30 minutes dying to this guy before figuring out the correct approach to this fight. The crab is running in a circle around the center of the room, occasionally stopping to launch an attack. There are 3 different attacks here: melee attack with a claw, a bubble spray affecting you with defense down debuff, and eye laser attack. While the first 2 are relatively easy to dodge, laser attack requires some effort. Once we defeat this boss, we get an AT-4 rocket launcher, quite a powerful weapon, but since we have only 10 rockets in total, we will be saving it for the bosses. Now it's time to leave the warehouse and proceed to Chinatown. Here we find Maeda kneeling over a manhole. It seems like that's where slimy mass created from the crowd in Central Park went. So I decides to go investigate, but not before receiving yet another lucky charm from Maeda. In the sewers we need to go through some sort of a labyrinth with many loot boxes and random encounters. Here we encounter probably the most annoying enemies of this game, bats. They use a sonic attack which deals minor damage but puts darkness debuff on you, which is very irritating as it causes our shots to miss. While we can remove this debuff with special items, it's not really worth it as debuff doesn't last that long, though it doesn't make it less annoying, so we have to do our best to dodge it. Eventually we find a way out and we see that the slime is getting into a reservoir. We need to get it out of there before it infects the whole city. Next we find the control panel, turn on the power and activate pumps. Now we arrive at the underground train station. We can't leave for now as the door is locked and we have to find the key first. We follow the tracks north and arrive at the next boss fight, the Centipede. It has several attacks we need to be wary of. Aside from the usual melee attack, this boss also can release a torrent of electricity, which causes darkness, or fire energy balls that apply poison debuff. Thankfully, all attacks can be dodged, and overall the fight is not that hard. After dealing enough damage, the centipede splits into 4 parts. Each of the pieces will spin around the room, going from corner to corner, occasionally attacking us. Here we just need to get them down one by one, and that's another boss defeated. We run through the tunnel and to the end of the bridge, where we find a dead cop and the gate key. Here Aya realizes that the slimy mass is heading towards the museum, which will be our next destination, but first we need to change the disc. We return to the locked gate and finally ready to head back to the museum once again, to deal with Eve once and for all. When we arrive at the lobby, we see a man in white going through one of the doors, so it seems like we have to follow him. We see him once again shortly after and encounter animated dinosaurs that were brought to life by Eve's powers. Ahead we find another locked door, so we have to go back to the lobby. We try the elevator, but it won't work until we disable the alarm. We go north and find a quiz pedestal. It briefly shows us pictures of animals and we need to answer correctly how many of them were hiding in order to get some loot as a reward. We proceed further and arrive at the room where a giant scorpion blocks our way. We see another pedestal, answer the question and approach the scorpion. It's not really a boss fight, so I won't go into details of that battle. Some more exploration and fights and we get to the giant stone head exhibit and there's nothing here. But once we leave it, we hear some noise behind and return to check what happened. Now it's trashed, but there's still nothing there except a fight against some bugs. We go to the previous room and get up to the upper floor. Here we nail another quiz question and in the next room we find a fire exit. Here we have an option to go down or up. Climbing down will get us a couple chests and then we go up to the third floor. At this point I have realized that for the first time since the start of the game I ran out of ammo, mostly because I was using a rifle with a higher rate of fire. Later I found out that the higher it is, the less damage a weapon deals per bullet. So at this point I had to switch to club, which is a melee weapon, so it obviously doesn't require ammo. It deals pretty decent damage, but its range is horrific as expected, so I literally had to chase these dinosaurs to hit them. I also suddenly realized that club has a passive effect allowing you to steal an item from an enemy, which is not really helpful, as here for example I stole medicine 1, which restores 45 HP, so it's pretty much useless with my current max HP. Anyway, after beating dinosaurs back to death, there's another quiz pedestal and one more in the next room. By the way, I knew all the answer because I paid attention to the dialogues during the game and definitely not because I googled it. In the next room, Pteranodon breaks the window and charges into us, so we have to deal with it. Thankfully, it's just a common enemy. After defeating a couple of his friends, we arrive at the room with the broken window. We climb out, jump down, and get through another broken window. After several fights, we finally get to the control room and disable the alarm. Right away we see a cutscene of a massive tyrannosaur skeleton coming to life, but we don't need to fight it for now. Since the alarm is now disabled, we can now use the elevator. But first we notice that the door to the Clamp's office is slightly opened and we find Maeda inside, who gives us seemingly the worst weapon in the game. Of course we will find the use for it later. After that we confirm that it was indeed Clamp who created artificial sperm for Eve. Clamp appears at the office and starts threatening Aya, but Daniel comes to the rescue using the power of his fists once again. Clamp tells that his plan was to bring artificial sperm to Eve so she could give birth to an ultimate being. After that he ignites and dies. On his body we find a key that will unlock every door in the building. We explore a little bit more, answer final quiz question and get to fight Triceratops. This fight is not hard but very time consuming. It took me almost 5 minutes to kill it. But it is definitely worth it, as it awards us with 50,000 XP, and now our level has increased to 33, which means we have unlocked the final parasite energy ability called Liberate. The description of the skill says liberates mitochondrial control. I will demonstrate it later in the game. For now, we move to the next room and get the second boss fight in a row. This is Tyrannosaur, the one we saw at the cutscene earlier. This boss has 3 attacks, the most used one is Frontal Fire Breath, which is quite easy to dodge as long as you run behind the boss. There's also a standard melee attack and Energy Blast which will follow Aya and it's quite challenging to dodge. But overall this fight is not that hard, and now there's nothing stopping us from reaching Eve. Except for almost 20 minutes of cutscenes. First we find Eve and she unleashes the slime monster which takes her away from Aya. Next we see a conversation between Maeda, Daniel and Aya. Turns out Melissa got a kidney transplanted from Aya's sister Maya. The mitochondria from the kidney was able to take over Melissa's mind as she was using immunosuppressants. Aya realizes that Maya was the original Eve all along. The slimy mass creates the barrier around Eve so she could give birth to the ultimate being, and the military tries to attack it again with fighter jets. However, it ends with the same amount of success as the previous attempt. Now the military approaches Aya, asking her to fly the helicopter to nuke the creature as she's the only one who won't combust. Aya agrees as there's no other choice, and Maeda is trying to give her something once again, but is interrupted by Daniel. Now Aya flies to Liberty Island to destroy the creature. Brave pilots sacrifice themselves to let Aya get closer to the target, and she fires a missile, blowing the slime to slimy pieces. The command is telling Aya to return, but she sees Eve and decides that now is the best chance to deal with her. She jumps down using a parachute and confronts Eve one last time. As any other boss, Eve has several different attacks. The most common one is firing a pair of energy blasts repeatedly. Those are easy to dodge though. She also fires a spray of energy darts from her fingers and occasionally grabs Aya, hitting her multiple times. While it's safe to say that this is the toughest battle until now, we can trivialize it using Liberate. It uses a full PE bar and deals massive damage. Once we beat her, the fight transposes into phase 2. Now Eve has different attacks, like flying into the air and shooting an energy missile which applies defense down, an undodgeable blast that causes stiffness, and a melee attack. But at this point I've just made use of a rocket launcher we got in the warehouse, and one Liberate later, Eve is finally defeated. On day 6, we find ourselves at a naval ship. We talk to Wayne and he suggests engraving one of our weapons and armor with our name. It will be important later. We return back outside and it turns out, even though we've defeated Eve, she was still able to give birth to the ultimate being. Maeda is trying to give Aya something again, but he is being dragged away by Daniel, as only Aya can defeat this monstrous baby. The fight consists of 4 different phases. In phase 1, the ultimate being has only 2 attacks, a white shockwave that deals minor damage and is easy to dodge, and a yellow shockwave which will drop our health to 1 HP. Phase 2 is also fairly simple. At the beginning, the boss can either repeatedly fire electric bolts at us or 3 large semi-guided bolts. After we deal some damage, it splits into 2 parts. Wings will detach and start attacking us on their own. The body will run across the arena, firing a purple beam, while the wings try to ram us or shoot us with rapid-fire energy bullets. Once we beat the body, phase 3 begins. The ultimate being has evolved even further. Now it can charge at us with a 2-hit combo which is quite tough to dodge. Additionally, it can jump into one of the corners and release a flurry of blasts. It also has a shockwave that cuts HP in half and a grab reducing our HP to 1. At this point, I'm sure you've noticed that Aya is healing herself when her HP drops too low. That's actually one of the armor effects which I personally find very valuable in this game. Finally, we get to the final phase of the fight. The only attack this form has is 4 pyramids occasionally shooting lasers at us. But the one big problem is that our weapon doesn't seem to deal much damage to the boss now. After several attacks, we get a cutscene where Maeda says that he has special bullets with Aya's cells in them. Daniel grabs those and jumps down from the helicopter, combusting along the way and throwing bullets to Aya. He lands in the water, so he should be fine. Now we get to use a gun that Maeda gave us earlier, and we obliterate the boss as every bullet is dealing 999 damage. But it's not over. Now we have a classic escape sequence. Whatever is left from the ultimate being is starting to chase Aya, and she decides that the only way to beat this thing is to blow up the ship. Aya jumps from the ship as it explodes, finally destroying the ultimate being for good. After that, we get a cutscene explaining that Aya's powers actually came from her sister, as she got Maya's cornea transplanted into her when she was a kid. After some time passes, we see Aya, Maeda, and Daniel with his son attending the opera, and we get to see the ending of the game. But it's actually only the first ending. The game doesn't end here. After the credits roll, we get 3000 bonus points and save our game. Now we have X Game Mode unlocked, which is basically a new game plus. It carries over our bonus points, items we have stashed away, and our engraved weapon and armor. But our level unfortunately resets. X game features stronger enemies, as we are now stronger as well, but the main feature of this mod is Chrysler Building, the 77th floor ultimate dungeon of this game. It becomes accessible on day 2, but since our level doesn't carry over, it's not really a good decision to go there right away, as enemies will just obliterate us. I will not cover this whole dungeon, as this video would have been twice as long, and I'm going to skip it to level 71. There's nothing here except some mitochondrian goop, but as we climb to level 77, we will find the final boss of this game. At this point, I would like to mention one thing about Parasite Eve I have been omitting before. It's beautiful music created by legendary Japanese composer Yoko Shimomura. She was later working on many famous games such as Xenoblade Chronicles, the Kingdom Hearts series, and Final Fantasy XV. As we approach the final boss, we get to hear the most beautiful melody of this game, accompanied by a heartfelt scene between Aya and her sister. This is the final fight of the whole game, and the hardest one by far. Original Eve has similar skills to our Liberate form, however, in addition to that, when she points at you, she summons Maya. Maya can either come to us and apply a debuff with minor damage, or come to Eve and either apply the barrier, which reduces our damage to 1, or heal Eve for 1000 HP. The problem here is that healing from Maya actually stacks each time, increasing an amount of HP restored by another 1000. Thankfully, there is a strategy to prevent Eve from healing. We just need to stop attacking her when she summons Maya, and as long as we have enough healing and revive items, we finally beat the game. Now it's time for some final thoughts. I have enjoyed Parasite Eve tremendously. Even though it's a 25-year-old game, it still holds pretty well today if we ignore the obviously outdated graphics. The battle system is probably my favorite one for RPG games of that era, and the inventory limitation feels like actually one of the main mechanics of the game and not a nuisance. Art direction, music, story, everything is on the highest level. Now, when I play classic games, I ask myself a question: would I like to see a remake or a remaster of a game? Frankly, if we're talking about Resident Evil 2 kind of a remake, I don't really need it, but I wouldn't decline a remaster with updated graphics, better menuing, and maybe voice acting. But nevertheless, the game is amazing, and I'm surprised that it has aged so well. I hope you liked this video. I decided to try this new longer format, so if you have enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to the channel, as it will provide me with great motivation to create similar videos in the future. As always, thank you for watching and have a great day.